Afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to Lunch with Books. If you would please turn off your cell phones. Next Tuesday, May 10th, John Devlin from the Wheeling Symphony will be here to talk about music as history from west to east, in honor of the life of our friend Bill Hogan. Shostakovich will be the subject here at Lunch with Books, and that will be next Tuesday. And the Tuesday after that, the director of the Blair Public Library used to work here, Erin. She's coming back to talk about Norwegians and Wheeling. You know any Norwegians in Wheeling? No. They know Erin. That's it. But she's going to tell us there may have been more, and that'll be on the 17th. Now, on the 19th, at 6 p.m. in this room, we'll be changing out our exhibit and putting up an exhibit of photographs by Bill Burke from Wheeling in the 1970s. So we'll have a reception and Bill will speak, and that'll start at 6 p.m. On May 9th. Having been born and raised in Canada, Alan Fitzpatrick has been a native West Virginian since 1973, when he graduated from Kent State University in psychology and became employed at the West Virginia Penitentiary in Mountfield as a classifications counselor. Since then, he has made the Wheeling area his home. He ran a retail apartment business for 33 years before retiring. He's always been fascinated by the early frontier history of the Upper Ohio Valley. And in 1997, he was a founding member of Fort Henry Days, which you're all, I'm sure, familiar with, the yearly living history commemoration and reenactment of the 1782 last battle of the American Revolution. The event is held at Wheeling's Oakley Park every Labor Day weekend, and Alan has written 4 nonfiction early American history books dealing with conflict between Native Americans and colonials during this tumultuous period of the 1700s. He has those books here with him today, as well as some of the artwork that he's done. And some of the names of the books are Wilderness War on the Ohio and Place of the Skull, and there's more than 4 here. Yeah, that's a typo. 6 books, correction. Here's Alan Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Sean, and everyone with the library here, and certainly all of you for coming today. Sean has in the past had, some excellent speakers on history for the Wheeling area, but we're going to put all that, we're going to dismiss that today. And talk about who was here before there was a Wheeling, and that is Native Americans, and so little is really known about them as a people, and that is for a lot of different reasons. One of them being that when contact happened with white people, which is, I'm going to say 1750-ish in there, that contact was not necessarily friendly. So everything that's been written for over 200 years has been written from the white side of the story. And the Native people couldn't write. And so they've written about dates and times and places and people and events. But that has been short on who these people were. And so I'm going to give a little thumbnail sketch. And then part of the reason for all this is I believe that we can see who they were by how they lived. And it's a little different than going to a museum and seeing things in a glass case. And so there are just some unusual things about them. First of all, the Native people who were here, their ancestors had been here up to 16,000 years. If you ever get up to Bettercroft, which is just outside of Wellsburg, they pushed that time period back to 16,000 years. And they were tribal people. You see, now tribal people exist today. You go to Pakistan and Afghanistan, and there's many countries in Africa where you have tribal people, decentralized government, clan-oriented. Clans were groups of families that had ties among them. And so this was sort of foreign to European people, English and German people come here, who had forgotten that earlier in their history, they were tribal people. The Celts and all the tribes, the Germanic tribes that fought against the Roman invasion. And so tribal people is one aspect of them. Here's a startling one. I've got 120 books written about this time period, the 1700s. And it's hard to find anything about this fact that the tribes here were matriarchal. Do you know what that means? They were, women ran the show. They owned all this.
Still do.
They owned the material culture. They gave you your name. They had a big say in who you're marrying. So that if Pete here wants to marry a native woman, her mother's going to have a say in that. And when he does, they move into her mother's sphere of influence, whether it's a lodge, something like that. And if there's divorce, watch out. Because the man goes and the children stay, and the extent of the bitterness of the divorce is gauged by how far her mother throws his things out the lodge door. Women ruled everything in the village. They decided the village chief, not the war chief. They decided traditionally when men could go to war. Imagine that the Joint Chiefs of Staff decide they want to bomb Iran, but they got to meet with a group of mature women first to get their approval. And the women say, "What? What's this crazy idea now? No more, no more. Go to war." That's the power that clan mothers and women had. They decided what happened to captives, and they mandated that captives be brought back during periods of war, alive, unharmed, because they were very wise women who realized that Native societies on the short end of the stick now that there's contact with white people, due to number one reason, not war, disease. And so adoption was mandated by clan mothers. And that was a foreign idea to colonial people where the man owns everything, you see. So there was some disparity. Here's an interesting fact. We were really close to here was a major east-west Indian trail, native trail, that came from the interior of Ohio, came down what's now Route 40, crossed the south end of the island, it was shallows, came up the north side of the creek, and headed east. And followed the creek, except they were people just like us. They liked shortcuts. So they come over this hill. And we know that because there's been artifacts found. Native people were farmed this area, hunted this area. This was their home. This was their land. They didn't believe in private ownership. That was a foreign idea. You see, they didn't divide like me and my, we had some trees cut down yesterday. There's no fence between me and my neighbor. We gotta be sure we're not sure. Are we over, we gotta get that stuff off the hill. Because there's a deed and a lot and measurement. No, Native people, no. But that did not mean that they didn't collectively believe that this was their land. This was the center of their world. You say, it was their home. They raised children here. They buried their ancestors here. And so that's a unique thing to understand that about Native people is that they had a different worldview. And that worldview, here's one thing that made them different, is they were right brain oriented.
Wow.
Right brain oriented. What does that mean? I had a Native woman in Santa Fe explain it to me in English words. She was very articulate. She said, she put her hand out, and she said, from the time you were this old, pointing at me, you've been raised in a culture, in a world, where there's a word, and she put her hand up to her mouth, a word given to everything in this whole manifest world you've seen, until you were so separate from spirit, you can't find spirit. You know? She could have just punched me in the mouth. It would have had the same effect. But she had a point, and she said, look, our people, our life, our world, our spirit comes from here, not from here. And that is because right brain people do not have a written language to cloud up there, so they were much more closer to nature and to spirit world. And so these are some of the interesting things about them. And we have that culture is not alive today. And of the 4 tribes that were here, there were Mingo, and they never called themselves that. They were Ohio Valley Seneca. Mingo was a derogatory, insulting word. It was an English language corruption of Mingwe, which meant snake people that came from the Lenape. Well, who are the Lenape? That's the second tribe. Lenape we know as Delaware. But Lenape never called themselves Delaware. That was an English term from Lord Delaware. When he laid claim to the Delaware River, he said, well, this is mine. All of those people over there, they're my people, Delaware. There were Wyandot, descendant of Huron. They owned the northern half of Ohio. And they had villages down the major rivers. And by the way, if the next time you're on the road to Steubenville, take a look at the old Mingo steel mill and imagine that on those flats was a thriving, vibrant Mingo community of many, many people. And all the flats both ways were cornfields. And the next village would have been up just north of Toronto. That was Logan's village. Then there were the Shawnee. And so these 4 tribes got along. They didn't always agree with each other, but they never went to war with each other. Why? Clan mothers. Come back to women again. Because women knitted Kinship Todd. You can't, if you think you were insulted by that Shawnee across the river, you can't, you've got cousins over there. You see, they reminded of the Kinship Todd. So these 4 tribes got along. They didn't say, hey, you see that line here? What are you doing on our property? You know, there's a Shawnee over here. You stay, you wind up, stay over there. No. Because there might be people from both sides. So what I want to do here is give you the context that you'll never find in any book written by a white person. And I know that sounds, but you see, there was a difference in cultures that still exists today. The things that I'm telling you, I have learned from Native people. I didn't know these things. I didn't know about the influence of women. And so if we look at how they lived, is going to tell us something about who they were. And I'm just going to arbitrarily pick this date, 1750. Because in or around, within a couple years of that, all the native people this side of the Allegheny Mountains became in contact with European traders and European influence. And traders were now bringing European goods to the natives. And so, and we're not going to go back 16,000 years, but I'm going to predate this time period so you can see how they lived prior to contact, and then how this contact with Europeans changed everything for the good and for the worse. And so, about 1750. Now, let's start with, what did they look like? What did Native people look like, 1750-ish? Well, this morning I shaved my hair off, I shaved my head. I could show you. But men wore their hair, usually in a certain style. They shaved both sides. They kept the scalp lock, what this was called in English language, and they would decorate it. And women would wear their hair in one braid. And this goes across all the tribes that were here. We call these Woodland. That's the white term for these tribes. And so they were prior to 1750 and post. And so it was very hard. If you're out on a trail and you see a party of men, of warriors coming down the trail, it's hard to say, that's, I can tell by his uniform, he's Shawnee. There's no uniform. And hairstyles and what they're wearing don't tell you a whole lot. But when they speak, their language tells you who they are, because they were distinctly different. They're wearing, prior to 1750, they're wearing clothing from animal skins. And you see, you could make this is a dressed deer hide. And I'm going to pass around some, so you can see how thin it is. We like to think, oh my goodness, they're wearing all this heavy. No, look how thin that is. You see? And so you could sew these into a blouse, into leggings, into all kinds of things for clothing. And would you want to make a pair of moccasins out of this? Not thick enough, right? You'd wear them out in a day. So they're going to a heavier, and these are from the animals that they're hunting. And so here's elk hide. You can always sew on another sole. And I'm going to pass these around here with that. I'll need this back for next winter. You can see that. And here's a piece of color. But they did all kinds of things with animal skins, and they would, in the wintertime, they would take a skin with the fur, and you'd wear that on the inside for like a parka. Sew several of these together. Okay, we'll pass that around. There's that elk hide. And so what were they living in? And what did their homes look like? They lived in lodges. They lived in longhouses. They lived in villages, because they're no longer hunter-gatherers on the road, although they still hunt. They are living in set. That village of Mingo Junction had been there for hundreds of years. And they're living in homes that look like this. And these will circulate through. These are pictures of lodges and longhouses that have been rebuilt. Some are smaller for individual families. Some are multi-dwelling. So we'll pass those around and pass these around here. And So the question has to come up, how would you build something like that? You know, you don't have an axe. You don't have steel. How are you gonna cut, to build these huge? And by the way, what they're covered in is in bark. You see? And usually ash or a poplar, and then we skin these off and put them on in sections like shingles. You know, we shingle our house, they would use these just for that. And so how would they cut down, you know, look at the size of some of these. How would they cut these down? They used tools. And this is an original, white people call these celts. But this is an axe head, and the stone is not local, come from the mountains, it's an igneous rock, and someone has shaped that by hand. Imagine how long that would take to give it an edge so that you can chop down a tree, you see? Use of a tool. And this was for trees 3 inches in diameter and under. There were bigger ones for much bigger trees. And so they managed to build with that. And you know, you needed a hammer or something. There's your hammer. A stone tool. This could double for something else in a pinch. And so we have to ask the question, what were they eating? And how were they hunting, if there, which is one of the, there's 5 ways: hunting animals, agriculture, fishing, trapping, and nuts and berries. You see, so what would they hunt with, and how would they do it? And they had a universal stone that they turned to for all their needs. And this stone, anybody have any ideas? Flint. Flint was found, Coshocton had the source of it. And there's many, yeah. Here. Flint Ridge was the main. If you ever get a chance, just west of Zanesville, Flint Ridge. And it's not a state site, I think it's a private, but it was where tribes went. That's where they used these trails. They traveled there on foot to dig flint out of the ground. And they had an arrangement that everybody agreed to. If you're there with your enemies, it's off limits to conflict while you're there. So they would take a piece of flint and a hammer stone, and it breaks like glass. You see, it's a glassy stone with sharp edges, and that you could fashion, you know, they wouldn't, here's an example of Flint Ridge flint. You don't want to dig out a handful of chunks like this and travel 300-400 miles with it. They would stay and start to shape what they're digging out. And here's one that somebody dropped. It's a blank. See the shape to it? Somebody's been working that with a hammer stone. It's an original. And you know, what were they trying to do with it? They're trying to make a point like that. You see, from that to that. And these would have razor sharp edges that you could scrape the inside of a hide on. You can cut your dinner with. They come in all sizes and shapes. Flint knife on a bone handle. So flint was used for any type of tool. You want to hunt birds, you need a small point. There's one there. And so the first hunting was done with tools like this, spear points. So if you're out in the woods and you find a spear point, know that it is very, very old, because new technology come along the way that made this obsolete. But if I'm going to hunt with this and there's a deer over there, this is about the range I need to be. You got to be an excellent hunter to be able to hit and to be able to get up close enough to throw this. You see, now a lot of when we talk about fishing, across from Steubenville, across from Fort Steuben, up on the hillside, up on the top, is called the East Steubenville Archaeological Site. And at that site, what happened was they were widening Route 2 there, and they came across a village that dates to 3,500 to 4,000 years old. And there's very few animal bones in the treasure. But what there is fish bones and clamshell. And huge mounds of it. They were coming down from the top, down to the river, which was at the height that it is now, and there were clam beds down there, and they're opening up clams or bringing them back up to the top, or they're hunting fish in pools. You see, you don't need a big spear, but you need something that you can. So that was another source of food. And the first technology that came along to hunting was what's called an attle, and it's a big arrow with a point. What's that stone again? Flint, right? And this was on a throwing stick, so that now if I get back here, maybe, that I can, as I throw this, flick that, and it'll go farther. And as you get real good at it, more accurate. You see? So you don't have to be so close to the deer. And attle, that was the next. And then about 1,000 years ago, along comes technology from the West. And that is the bow and arrow. That came here to Native people. And when that came here, there's no need now for attle, or spears. Everybody wanted one of these. You know, it's like the latest Game Boy. I don't want that, Dad. I don't want that Sega. I want the good. And a native from Jimenez Pueblo out west, this looks like a kid's butt, doesn't it? This is actually in juniper, a copy of a Comanche bow, because as they're writing, Comanche were horse culture. By the way, Comanche were patriarchal. So that what that means is if you're a woman and you're captured here during the war, whether you're white or you're another native, you are protected by the clan mothers as long as you don't put up a struggle. That every warrior knows that you cannot be violent under penalty. The clan mothers looked at her and said, she might be a mother one day, a wife, get captured by the Comanche, patriarchal, you would be gang raped in 24 hours. They're not adopting, they want slaves to take care of the horses because they're following the buffalo. This would be shot from underneath the neck of a horse, a warrior, and tremendous pull on this one. You can certainly, when the talk is over, feel that. So the bow and arrow made its introduction here, and now, you know, I'm back. If I was a good shot, I'm back here. Imagine. And if there's any fellows here that shoot bows, know that. And so when you're out and you find points, a lot of these were ones that they lost in the woods, you see. So, okay, we got that covered. But their mainstay food came here about the same time, and it was the introduction of corn. And corn come from Mesoamerica. And there's a lot of discussion with who exactly, but Aztec is a good. And corn changed everything because now, instead of constantly worrying about hunting, you could be stationary, live in a lodge, and grow your food in one place. And so every tribe that's here has got cornfields, you say, and they're harvesting. By the way, Indian is a term. This is called Indian corn. The only Indians here are either from India or you go to India and meet Indians. Somehow Columbus got his thing screwed up there and thought he was an Indian. And, oh yeah, these people are Indians. No. And so they're growing corn, and along with it, they're growing squash and melons. And along with that, they're growing beans. And they call these the Three Sisters, because they would plant the corn starts to come up, the beans at the base of it wind around the corn as it's growing, and the squash keep the weeds down. So these three were always found together. And that was a big part of their diet. How did they cook? Cooking, there's another Native American corn. They made bars. How come it's not flat on the bar? Did somebody mess up there? A pot that they're cooking with, because they're putting corn and squash and pieces of meat in here. This sits in a fire. So it sits right in the coals. One of the problems with, I gotta be careful I don't drop the hole, is that if the family dog or the kids are playing and they bump it, you can break it. So they're constantly remaking pottery in every village, and women do the cooking. Now they're making use of, this was a squash that's been made into a carrier. They're weaving beautiful grasses with designs in them. This is native made. They're making decorative pottery. This is not for cooking, and this is Southwest, not local, but just gives you an idea. Because these symbols all have meaning. That's not just some random. Oh, I think I'll put this one out. Each one has meaning. And they're going to make their own kitchen or dinner table utensils out of wood. Stir your dinner. We're going to carve wooden spoons. They made the bowls too. Everything. They had a reason for all of that. And this is a piece of Southwest pottery that was decorative, a bowl. This is 1,100 years old. And yet by the same culture, and this was gifted to me. This is a utilitarian, and you can see the person, a woman, made this in a coil, and she pinched, and there's her pinch marks. And this would have been a cooking pot, you say. So they, all cultures are making their own pottery. How did we start a fire? No matches?
Flint,
Pardon me?
Flint,
With what?
I'm not native.
Flint itself won't start a fire. Let's start a fire. Is that okay, Sean? Can we start?
Yeah, go ahead.
They would use getting tangled up here. A bow drill. And the idea is, and this is friction oriented here. Where's the, well, maybe we'll just get it apart now. Put your finger on the inside. So every family carried one of these. If you're traveling, if you're a warrior traveling, you have one of these in your blanket. You can start a fire. And what you're getting at with Flint, there's something missing in there, but that came later. They like music, they like to dance, they like to sing. Cece, can you sing this? They were big singers. They like to tell jokes. I have met a man from New Philadelphia's house, Lenape, and I used him as a subject to paint a chief, and he said, why do white people paint natives with this stern, solemn look? He said, our people told jokes all the time. Paint me laughing. And so this was part of their culture, saying, this was an important thing that's been overlooked. This is what's called a wampum belt. And this is what's called a string of wampum. And wampum was traditionally beads that were cut and drilled from clamshell, but not fresh water. They're off the coast of Connecticut, is where you find the quahog. And there was usually two colors. And this is a replica of glass beads. So these were trade beads, because as contact with whites started to pick up, they were trading beads to the natives. Now, white people thought that this was Indian money. Indian money, because they so valued it. Each belt has a story, and it's like a legal document. My people and your people have a clear road with no obstructions for our mutual fidelity and understanding, as long as we honor this. This is what's called a road belt, saying clear road, or a two rows belt, but it's very simply a peace belt. So that if I enter Sean's village here, and I want to present this to him, and he looks at it, and then he motions to the clan mothers over here. and the clan mothers decide they want to talk about this. Because if they accept it, it means that your people and the people I represent are now on mutual, friendly, peaceful terms. And that is enforced because when those young men, if you accept this, and those young men, young hot-blooded warriors say, there was a terrible insult yesterday. My brother was insulted by those Shawnee across the river. And we want to go to war. And the clan mothers, because there's two of these made, one that you would accept and one that we would keep. And you would bring this up and you said, don't you remember this? Knucklehead. Now, on the same hand, they had 7-Eleven sponsor this bill. See the 7. That is a war hatchet. This is a war belt. And if you accept this, every male in your tribe is going to go to war with no question. There's no vote. Often if this was presented, because I would be coming and saying, I'm looking to your people as an ally. Say, we need your help to go to war. You may come up to me if you're the head of the clan mothers and knock it out of my hands. That means no way. We won't even touch it. No. And leave. No. We're not going to participate. So these were, and many Native people today are trying to reacquaint and recapture buy them back because they're in museums, a lot of them. This is I was at a seminar in Buffalo here recently, and the Haudenosaunee people, otherwise known as Iroquois Confederacy. And Iroquois is an insulting word to them. It comes down from the French, because the Haudenosaunee Six-Nation Confederacy fought the French. And this is the 5 nations before they added the 6. And so, Mohawk, keeper of the Eastern Door, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca. You see each tribe is represented in this belt. And this goes by another name. It's called the Hiawatha Belt in the 1500s. It still exists. They have ownership of it now. The Hiawatha Belt, where these 5 nations made a pact together. Now, go through your purse or wallet and pull out a $1 bill and look on the backside. The eagle is holding in its claws a bundle of arrows. And this goes back to the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, where Hiawatha got up and spoke, one alone of us, and broke the arrow. But when you put us all together, we're unbreakable. So this was a peace belt between 5 nations. They added the Tuscarora later. Okay. All right. We're running out of time here. And I just say one more thing. Tobacco amongst all these tribes was a sacred herb. They did not smoke. And we think them sitting around with peace pipes. No, this was burned as a prayer to the Great Spirit. Remember they raped rain? And they still do this today. And other herbs that they used were sage and sweetgrass. Okay, and one last thing is, no turquoise was found here naturally, but turquoise made its way here as trade from out west. And there's a piece of turquoise And they cut it into beads. And Native people believed that turquoise was a gift from the Great Spirit as a piece of the sky. Okay, so when the Spanish came to the Southwest, the Spanish are looking for silver and gold. They looked at the natives digging turquoise, and the only value they seen there was to enslave the natives and send them to Mexico to work and die in the silver mines. And so the turquoise sites were abandoned for a long time. So along comes, it's quarter till, along comes 1750 and 1751. And a new people come into native land. And I'm going to call it for what it was. It was an invasion. An invasion. The native people were the people who needed a wall built to keep out illegals. Never happened. And so it wasn't too long. And at first what happened was traders from eastern Pennsylvania were coming across the mountains bringing trade goods. They're bringing European goods that a native people had never seen before. And what are they bringing? Steel, iron. Chop down a tree with this or with this. Understand? Cut your dinner with this or with this. When this gets dull, to try and chip a new edge on that, you're going to end up breaking it. It's very difficult. Here, this we can just sharpen. If I don't cut one, okay? French made. Well, there's a conflict because the French aren't the only white people coming here. The English are. English knife. Bigger is better. Okay? There's an arms race going on too. English, French. Is this for cutting down trees? Who made this? Native people didn't make it. Any ideas?
Spanish?
Traders.
Pardon me?
Spanish?
No. Close. Fleur-de-lis on the back end. This is French. The French are making these and shipping them to Canada. And now there's no trade involved. You don't have to produce some skins to get one of these here. Because this is a war axe. That's for splitting a skull. And they're saying, go sink it in some English heads. Okay? Very lightweight. If you get a chance, come up here and pick it up. And they're bringing all kinds of things with them. Guess what the number one and number two is? It's not the knife, it's not all that. It's the tin cup. You know, no one has ever asked why the Wyandotte attacked Fort Henry in September 1777. Why did they come here? Why did, when they couldn't take the fort, keep it bottled up for the next 2 hours? They're going through the cabins for cups. What kind of, how can that be? Clan mothers, we need cups. The British at Fort Detroit are giving us guns and gunpowder and all that, but they don't have cups. And what's even more important, slots. These don't break when the dog or the kids try and knock it over. And so battles were fought because it's, you know, You can drink out of it, but you can cook in this. You see, you can carry this on your belt and walk 30 miles in a day and stop, throw some corn in there, a little water. You know, this is an essential thing. If you're hunting or traveling or whatever it is, you can have a tin cup. They're bringing wool blankets. There's no wool here. The Spanish brought sheep to the Southwest. And then they're trading to get silk to decorate. They like to decorate. They like colors. You see? They're bringing cloth. Why spend all? Because making clothing was part of women's job. This is going to, you know, the clan mothers talk it over and they say, we could save a lot of time and do other things we like to do, like have parties. If we didn't have to make skin clothing, so they trade to get cloth. That's a colonial shirt. And now every native wants, men and women, want to wear white man's cloth and decorate with it. We're even trading and getting steel arrowheads for those that still want to play with bows and arrows. And they're bringing something else. I saved this for you because they are bringing flint. Well, we already have one. What they don't have is steel, flint and steel. You can start a fire in under a minute. If you have a little bit of bark and some grass, and you get the sparks to, see that? Steel and flint. So this changed their world tremendously. And you know, this was a big item, the kettle, copper kettle. You can boil things in here, you can carry it. And it's pretty heavy to carry a pot that big. Glass, what's in this glass?
Vinegar.
Hmm?
Vinegar.
No,
Rum. Liquor.
rum, liquor,
Oh.
it's liquor,
That's good.
liquor. And white people, or native people have never been exposed to this. And there were licensed traders from Pennsylvania coming here. And they're bringing a little bit of liquor and a lot of pots and pans. And so Sean and I are white guys in business, and we're bringing, we got 20 horses loaded with pots and pans and everything else, and a couple kegs of liquor. And we need men to help us. And we hire some of those guys on the frontier who are out of work, and they get the bright idea when they travel with us. Now that we know how we got here, we could do this on our own. But you know what? We won't bring trade goods. We'll beat all the traders and come here with liquor and take all the skins, because that's what they want, is animal skins. First it was beaver, till the beaver were hunted to extinction. Then it's deer skins, and there's a big appetite for that back in England. And so they get you drunk, they take all your furs, and they skedaddle by morning. And that may be what happened here that gave Wheeling its name, because one thing that native people agreed on was that this place was Wheel, place of the skull. And this event that happened here happened before there were settlers. And Cece did a great painting for the book. Because the question comes up, why would natives cut off somebody's head and put it on a post? What is the motivation? And you have to understand native people at the time. She did a great painting of that. And And the raven, who is a guardian and a messenger from the spirit world, is making sure that the spirit of the evil person, because something terrible happened down where the civic center is. That was a seasonal hunting camp. Something terrible happened there. And the worst thing that can happen in native view of the world is that your body, your head is separated from your body at death. That your spirit will now be stuck in purgatory forever. And this guy's there to keep faith with it, the raven. And so let's talk about the final thing. Oh, yes. White people brought this. The smooth bore, muzzle loading, black powder, and in this case, this is a musket, not a rifle. And for hunting, I can be up against that back wall out there, and now, as long as I have gunpowder, and I have a lead ball, and I have a spring in that musket that's not broken, because if that spring breaks, this is now worthless. There's a 75 caliber 3/4 inch lead ball. And this does something else also. This makes the bow and arrow obsolete in warfare, because with the advent of white people coming here, with all the things they brought were not gifts to Native people. They wanted furs in return. And there's now French and Dutch and English competing for that. And they're starting to arm natives. And this works on and I took the flints out of here so I wouldn't be tempted to fire with gunpowder like I did down in Milesville. Almost set off. But you put gunpowder in here, put your lead ball down, you pull your ramrod, you ram it down, and when you fire it, this gives off a spark and ignites it and shoots the ball out. And in warfare, they abbreviate that by, they call it fucking ball. Small stuff, put your gunpowder, pour that down, camp it, prime, and you can get off 4 or 5 shots. So these were used in warfare.
Repeaters.
Pardon me?
Repeaters.
Yeah. And of course, Native people were outnumbered. And so that brings us, we've got a couple minutes for questions. And maybe that's eliminated a bit about who these people were. Questions? Yes?
You said they didn't smoke tobacco. Because like the Grave Creek Mound in Moundsville, they do have a lot of clay pipes and things.
Yes.
Did they?
Well, there was different species of tobacco. And there was some that's ceremonial. Then there's others that they did smoke, yes. Yeah, I don't want to say that they never smoked. You're right, they did. But this type that was used for ceremony now. Yes.
He was a resident in the area I grew up in, there on Benwood Hill. He
Yeah.
spoke before he came in here. He spoke of a trail that went down over the
Yes.
right from Fort Clark.
Yes.
Because I grew up like 2 miles away from where you was a resident. Can you tell me a little bit about that trail?
Sure. Now, white people thought, and still do today, that there were set trails. And, Native people traveled so many deer trails, but they knew all the shortcuts. They knew and one of the things that had been for years and years and years, a question was, how did the Wyandotte, first of all, no one knew it was Wyandotte. How did the Wyandotte capture Louis Whittle and his brother on Big Wheeling Creek, which was a major trail? The Whittle family got here late, so they took some land out Big Wheeling Creek. They're sitting right on a war trail. That's fine in peace. times a piece, but boy, if 4 ever breaks out, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Anyway, the story goes, John Wetzel left his 2 sons to hoe corn, one of them being Lewis, and they were captured by Wyandotte. How did the Wyandotte get them out? Had never been resolved, and I was living on Benwood Hill, and an old timer up there showed me where the old road was before they built. In 1911, they built Benwood Hill Road, but there was an old settlers that come down from Fort Clark Estates, and it followed. There's a run there that comes down to the graveyard in McMecken called Graveyard Hollow, and that the Wyandotte, they can't take these 2 captives out the Elm Grove way to Shepherd's Ford. But they take a shortcut. They go up Sorghum Ridge on the other side, come up on top, and cross down on what would be 88 there, 86, 88. Make their way down the run down to Graveyard Hollow, crossed the river. There were shallows, and went up the other side. Now, I don't know what township it is in, outside of Belair, but it's called Indian Run. And so I presented this information to, his name escapes me right now, who was the Lewis Wetzel expert. And he said, I'll have somebody check it out. He didn't believe me. I said, this is how they go. And so he had Travis Zeke, they got topographic maps, and Travis Zeke, a local here, followed this, and sure enough, because the next time you're on I-70 and you come up on just before the mall, if you look on the right side, if you're in the right-hand lane, and you'll see where there's a doctor's urgent care and America's #1 Inn, I think it's called. If you look right down, you'll see bulrushes down there. That's where Wetzel Springs was. That was a natural springs, and that's where the Wyandotte took their captives out to for the first night. And that's where Lewis Wetzel and his brother escaped from. Wow. Yeah, they went out because it was a trail. That maybe you and I would look and say, that's not a trail, that's a deer path, but they traveled it. The question is always, because if we look at that, how did the Wyandotte get past Wheeling and Elm Grove onto the old Warriors Trail? They came in the same way. You see. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, which was verified. I got a verification. Yeah, you're right.
Oh, that's a dog.
Yes.
Can you talk on the petroglyphs a little, like what's the purpose of the petroglyphs that were found like in cedar rocks
Sure.
and so on?
Sean, can I? Do we have time I can answer that?
Yeah, as long as you answer my question for that.
Blackmail.
His question is, when are you going to quit?
I'll just cut you off.
All native people did petroglyphs. Now, there's books you can get. I have them. Oh, that's a duck. Oh, that's a bird. Oh, that's a white person's interpretation. Oh, yeah, they're pecking images of birds. No. I had the fortunate opportunity out west with a shaman in training at Zuni who took me back in an area white people had never been. That is not on the map. I've got a great sense of direction. We went from a paved road to a gravel road to a dirt road to we walked. I could never find my way back there. And there was an uplift of sandstone rocks covered in hundreds of these. And he knew what they were. And he said, these were totems. This was a shaman. This had meaning to the person who carved it. It may look like a duck or a bird, if you wanted to believe that, but this had special meaning to the person. And pointed to one and said, that's a witch. It's an image of a witch. I wouldn't know. There was pigtails on it, stick figure. It was see, so these were, he actually, there was a handprint, he put his handprint on that handprint and said, you know, again, right brain, you see, right brain, not left brain, we're trying to figure out left brain, not right brain. He knew what the person who packed it in there intended, what his message, yeah. And Sean, you have?
Yeah, last question. Do you agree with me, Alan, that the whole world would be better off if we were all matriarchal?
Wow. I think I'm allowed a phone call to my attorney.
I'll take that as a yes.
Well, the clan mothers had a purpose, and it was called survival.
Right.
Survival. They're being driven to extinction by white man's diseases and war. You know, they took casualties. But smallpox and influenza, things they had. So clan mothers were, you know, they were very conservative about war. They picked the village chief. If they didn't like the job he was doing, he's out. They looked over, a war party comes in with captives. Who's waiting at the edge of the village? They know there's a war party coming in. It's not Hollywood. It's a clan mother. They took their time and looked over every single captive and made a decision on the spot. A group of 5, 6, 7 women decided she's a candidate for adoption. They put a dab of red paint on her forehead. She's not going to run a gauntlet. They're going to clean her. They motion other women to take her away and clean her and dress her and feed her. She's traumatic. You say. Whereas they bring this guy in. The clan mothers look him over. By all rights, he is the enemy. He hates Native people. He's killed Native people, possibly. They should motion a warrior to come over and sink a tomahawk in his head and be done with him on the spot. He would do it to natives if he had that choice. Well, wait a minute. These are wise women. I look them over and they talk. He's in good shape. I think he's worth a horse. What are they worth a horse? What are they talking about? Remember in war, there's traders bringing all this stuff. Those traders aren't going to show their face because they're coming from Port Pitt into a hostile native village. We need horses, pots and pans. But another clan mother said, he's just here. He's not worth a horse. But maybe we can get 2 pots. You're going to take him to Fort Detroit and ransom him to get the goods they need. So the clan mothers come over and they put a dab of red paint. I'm finishing up, Sean. And they put a dab of black right next to it. And the villagers howl. And 2 warriors come over and strip him naked. He's going to run the gauntlet. And they line up with their switches and clubs. But those clan mothers have also spoken. Remember that red dab? That means go easy on him. Don't poke out his eye. Don't break his arm. We're going to try and get a horse.